Hi, you clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Thursday. Here we are, 2nd of December. The hurricane season of 2010 in the Atlantic Basin is officially over. We are unlikely to have any more disturbances during December. Already, even though we're not to the end of the year, we can start looking for clues in the pattern as to what may happen during next year's hurricane season. Looking at the sea surface temperature map over here, you can see the main features are the strong La Nina going strong in the central Pacific, having trouble strengthening but maintaining itself quite well and will likely last well through the winter. Cold ring of water along the west coast of the North American continent indicates the negative PDO. Warm water east of Japan over here, classic cold PDO signature, something we haven't seen since last decade. Looking at the ENSO forecasts, generally taking us upward towards neutral by next summer, but it's worth looking at the CFS, which just tanks this La Nina, really goes bonkers with it. Ensemble mean taking us all the way down towards -3 by the time we get to March over here. Some of these new blue runs in here taking us all the way down under -3.5, and anywhere under -2.5 would be the strongest La Nina ever observed since 1950, and you can see that the ensemble mean, even through as we get into next summer, still has us under -2 in the strong La Nina threshold. A very, very potent model here, probably overdone, but it'll be interesting to see how long the La Nina can last, given that cold PDOs can often allow La Ninas to become multi-year events. Looking at the CFS, sea surface temperature forecast, you notice for January, February, March, you see a little bit of warm water here in the eastern Atlantic, cold water in the northwest Atlantic, not very dissimilar to what we're seeing exactly right now. Warm water in the eastern Atlantic, cold water up here, but notice what happens as we get down towards next summer in the June, July, August period. You notice the La Nina is still going strong. Notice the cold water's here, but notice it's also much cooler down here in the southeast Atlantic, and this is indicating what happens is when you get this kind of a winter, we're going to have the Arctic Oscillation going positive now based on what's going on in the southern hemisphere, and what that's going to do is with the cold PDO you're going to get a much stronger jet in here, strong jet into Europe, and this is going to be building the ridging over the North Atlantic over here, and this is going to be bringing strong easterly winds cranking off Africa and right over the eastern Atlantic, which is going to cool the water over here by evaporative cooling, the opposite of last year where we had a negative Arctic Oscillation which brought westerlies in the anomalies, which allowed the water to warm to record levels this previous spring. This will be the opposite pattern this winter. We'll probably cool off a little bit here, but you notice all the warm water up in the North Atlantic in the higher latitudes. Cold water in here generally suggests that we're going to have warmer water here in the MDR, main development region, in the deep tropics, so it's not going to be completely dead. We're not going into necessarily a negative AMO signal over here. If we get the warm water here and the cold water here, you're generally going to be looking for a warmer tropics in here. Not as warm as this year, but we're not going to be lacking heat either. Probably going to be more of a warm signal in here. If we look at some of the analog years for this season, 1951, cluster of tracks off the eastern seaboard, few in the Caribbean. This was following the 1950 season, which was a good analog to 2010. This year actually reversed from a La Nina to a weak El Nino by the time we got to the peak months of the season, and we're unlikely to reverse that far this year. This is 1955, second year La Nina after the 1954 season. Cluster of tracks off the eastern seaboard, 3 storms hit North Carolina. Here's 1996, after the 1995 season, which, if you remember, was very similar to the 2010 season. We had some tracks in here in 1995, but the big story was the Cape Verde season that year. And here we see the following year with a track of storms, Cape Verde in nature, but aimed farther west. Again, multiple storm hits on North Carolina. 1999, after the 1998 season, again, more storms threatening Carolina, and cluster of tracks in the southwest Atlantic Basin. And finally we have 2008 in the analog package, another La Nina cold PDO year reversing after 2006-2007. Cluster of tracks more focused into the Gulf of Mexico here in the northern Caribbean, but the general pattern is analogous to what this year is going to be. And you notice in most of these years how the tracks are focused farther west in here towards the southeast United States, especially farther west than the years previous, the prior years during the hurricane seasons where there were more recurvatures on average, and we can see why if we look at the pattern for those years at 500 millibars. Notice all the blocking over here over southeast Canada, forcing the negative down here centered near North Carolina underneath, and this just focuses trouble, and you get the ridge out here, and you start bringing storms underneath, and you start threatening this area of the world. And you can see why, because of the negative PDO over here in Alaska pumping this jet right into North America, allowing the ridging to just balloon up over here over everything. And with the positive Arctic oscillation, we're more likely to get that pattern next year. The problem with this year, even though we had the PDO going negative with the trough in the Northeast Pacific, what happens is all this blocking in the Arctic over here means a weaker jet. So even though we have the trough in here, the jet is weaker with shorter wavelengths, which allowed this trough to dig in over here over New England and the Northwest Atlantic, which set off the Cape Verde season very nicely, but all the storms recurved east of the United States. But this year, with the opposite pattern, with the Arctic oscillation going positive instead of negative, we're more likely to have a stronger jet coming into North America, pumping the ridge in here, and get a pattern more similar to what the analog package has for next hurricane season, which would be more of a dangerous pattern for the United States. What we didn't get this year, we may fill in with next year. You notice most of these years filling in this area that we didn't get in the 2010 season, so we may have to watch out for things trying to fill in this area. We're likely to have less activity overall than last year. I mean this year. We're not going to get 19 named storms again, probably more in the range of 13 to 16, but ACE could still be high in terms of overall storm power next year. You can see some of these years, 1955 and 1996 were big hitters in the ACE department. 1955 was a second year La Nina, not that warm in terms of sea surface temperature, but it still beat this year in terms of ACE. So these years can pack a punch, and we'll have to be watching out. Overall, just looking at some of these pattern indicators for next year, can't hone in on a whole bunch of stuff yet, but it is already we can start to see what's going on in the Pacific and the overall pattern globally. Where is the focus of heat going to be next year? We're going to be watching for that over the winter to see what happens. We're going to start cooling stuff in here a little bit, but still going to be in that pattern where we can get an active Atlantic and a cold Pacific decadal oscillation. Warm Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation is good for Atlantic hurricane activity, so we're going to have to continue watching here at home and everywhere else for potential impacts next year, and we shall see what happens. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.